So it's incredible to me. I can't believe my ears when I talk to people who keep on going back to Zane Hodges' idea that what James was talking about is a righteousness before men. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense. So I pull out the scriptures. I go to James. I've got it all up here, you know. I have it all right in front of me. I'm not quoted to you. You can go to the Bible yourself if you want to spend the time. But nowhere in the passage can you even get from the context of the passage can you glean that. The only reason why you can try to make that speculation is if you want to make the Bible say something that it doesn't say, which is basically what Zane Hodges wanted to do. And I know why, because he was arguing with Lordship Salvation people, and the book of James was in his way. And he couldn't say that the scriptures were inerrant, so he had to make the scriptures fit. But it's a cockamamie. Whenever you twist something around, as smart as you are, as much of a scholar you are, it makes a total complete idiot out of you. Because when you read it on its face, it can't make any sense. First of all, let's assume for a minute that God is trying to make this point through James, that this is that man will look righteous before men if he has works, which is not found in James chapter 2. So he goes and he uses an example, right? He goes, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Okay, save him from the ridicule of his friends? Oh, this salvation has to do with something else? Or well, maybe we'll take the Greek and try to move it around because we can't accept it the way it is. Right? Then it goes, show me your faith without deeds and I will show you my faith by my deeds. Okay, he is showing off this statement here, okay, is basically, yes, this statement right here, verse 19, is a statement before men. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God. Even the demons believe that and shudder. But then it turns. This was a snippet of an example. It wasn't talking about a righteousness before men. It was like, yo, you think you're righteous before God and you have no works. I'll show you my works by my faith by my works. But this is not the context of everything that was said there, really, because it goes to verse 20. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? And this is where it doesn't matter. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? No. It does not say anything about that God imputed righteousness to Abraham when he offered his son Isaac on the altar. Yes, it was an outward showing of his faith, right? But you see, if you read down to verse 22, you see that his faith and his actions were working together and his faith was made complete by what he did. Absolutely. No problem with that. But this isn't talking about a righteousness that came from men, because the righteousness that was imputed to Abraham was by God. And it wasn't at that time, it was before that time. So if you're using this as an example to be an example before men, it's a poor example because it's not true. Abraham was not considered righteous at that time. He was considered righteous 2 chapters before that by faith in Genesis chapter 15. So if I'm trying to make an example to you in the Bible, how it says that somehow or another God imputed righteousness to him at that time, okay, was not he considered righteous then? No, he was considered righteous back in Genesis chapter 15. Not Genesis chapter 22. A lot happened between those chapters, but he was considered righteous by God by faith before that. And it was used by Paul in Romans. Right? So you're telling me that God is going to use a stupid example? Is God so dumb? It says here We have been saying, this is Romans, this is Paul, we have been saying that Abraham's faith was accredited to him as righteousness apart from works. Okay? Under what circumstance was it credited? Was it after he was circumcised or before? It was not after, but before. When James says, was not Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? He was not, because it's a contradiction, because Paul is saying and Moses was saying that he was considered righteous before that happened when he believed. And it's kind of weird, because now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited to them as righteousness, without any works. So, why is God making a contradiction here? Is it before men? When James says, was not Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered up Isaac on the altar? I'm going to ask you this. Was he considered righteous at that time? Nowhere in Genesis chapter 22 does it say that God imputed righteousness on Abraham at that time. And it doesn't say that this righteousness was before men, because the righteousness was imputed upon him. And James used Genesis chapter 15:6 and said Abraham, but his name was Abram then. And the scripture was fulfilled. Abraham was considered righteous. No, the scripture was fulfilled. He was considered righteous back in Genesis chapter 15. However, the fruition of that promise and the thing that was the scripture was fulfilled was the scripture that was actually fulfilled in Genesis chapter was in Genesis in James that James was talking about in Genesis. The scripture that was fulfilled was Genesis chapter 15 and verse 5. And what was that scripture that was fulfilled? Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to them, so shall your offspring be. That came to fruition as a matter of works. But as far as God considering him righteous, he was considered righteous because right after God said this to him, Abram believed the Lord and he accredited it to him as righteousness. So it's a bad example, and it's not even true. It doesn't matter who it's before, whether it's before men, whether it's before God, because it is before God, because the righteousness came from God. Because James is basically saying that the scripture, Abraham believed God and it was credited for righteousness, was fulfilled at the wrong time. That scripture was fulfilled immediately when it was told to him, because he had believed God. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is of your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside, said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram, not Abraham at the time, Abram believed the Lord, and it was accredited to him as righteousness at that time, for believing what God had said to him, that his offspring will be as the stars of the sky. The test that came to Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, when Abraham's faith was completed and he had done what he was supposed to do, the angel said to him, because you have done this, the scripture that says that your offspring will be as many as the stars in the sky, that was what was going to come to fruition because of what Abraham had already done. So when James said that he was considered righteous at that time, and then in James chapter 2 said, and the scripture was fulfilled that Abraham believed God and it was credited to him with righteousness, which is not true, and he was called the friend of God. You see, and James says, you see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. No, Abraham was considered righteous before he had done anything, before he was circumcised, and before he had offered up his son Isaac on the altar, and because he had went forward and his faith gave him the strength to pass the test, the angel said, because you have done this, your offspring will be as many as the stars in the sky. However, Abraham believed that, and it was credited to him as righteousness when Abraham had spoken that to him. So that was not fulfilled at that time. It was not. It was fulfilled at the time it was spoken to him. So, no matter how you dice it, James misspoke. And if James misspoke, then how could it have been God speaking through James? It's impossible. Thank you.